Hello, it's June 2022, and I would like to do a real quick follow-up video on my previous video with regards to men's rights groups, men's support groups. But before I do that, I would like to answer a question from a few people and talk about another point before I get into that. So some people have asked me about how my feet are doing with the swelling, and I just wanted to say this morning, and this video is in relative real time, I had a hard time putting my right shoe on my foot, and at first I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and then I realized my foot has swollen even more. So I just wanted to answer that question for those who have asked. Now, before I get into the topic of this video, talking about men's support groups. Now, a lot of people may look down on men's support groups, saying, well, these are weak men, they're whiners and everything else. And you know something, perhaps a lot of men are whiners because there are just people who just whine. But I want to highlight a very important point here. And I've been on both sides of the fence here, so I'm speaking with two perspectives. Successful men have support groups. Now, it may not be an official support group where everyone sits in a semicircle and talks and, you know, sings Kumbaya and hold hands and everything else. But there are support groups for people in a social environment. And what I mean by that is men, and this relates to women, but I'm only specifically speaking about men, will elevate each other. So if you have friends, for example, in a certain profession, or you want to become part of that profession, they will elevate you, and that is a form of a support group. It's more traditionally called networking, or in layperson's terms, it's who you know. And that is a form of a support group. When we talk about support groups for men who are going through, for example, distress and everything else, we think about a group gathering and so forth. But you have to keep in mind, men who are successful and who move forward have a support group, whether it be even family, for example, giving them money or helping them with a career path or whatever, or just being supportive and being positive. These are forms of support groups. Now, what I want to talk about is I've had people since this video on men's rights and men's support groups private message me saying, well, there's this and there's that and everything else. I've talked about what I'm about to say in older videos, and it's time to revisit this as well. And all the topics that I've been talking about recently, I've talked about over the years, and just simply revisiting them and possibly even approaching the topics from different angles. One of the biggest challenges that I have with what support networks are available, I don't fit the criteria for most of them or all of them. I'll give you an example. Some support groups, for example, that will help men deal with drug and alcohol addiction, or anger management, or even family with regards to custody battles and so forth. The problem is I don't fit any of those subjects. And I remember years ago, one group wanted to help me, but you had to be part of, for example, Alcohol Anonymous or something like that. And they said, well, do you drink? I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't have anger management issues. And they suggested, well, why don't you just, join one of these, and then you can be part of our group and we can see what we can do to help you. So basically, and I'm not disrespecting this person, this was years ago, they were trying to figure out a way to get through the loopholes. Here's the problem. Sure, you can go and lie, and say, yes, I have a drug addiction or alcohol or anger issues or whatever. But that also now becomes part of a permanent record that you have this issue. And then try to explain to someone later, well, I lied. And then all of a sudden, well, either you're a liar or they're not convinced that you had to lie to get help. And when you look at homeless shelters, and I humbly say that I have stayed in one twice, and a complete nightmare. When I was working as a mental health worker, I had visited these places, part of the job, but to actually be in one, you really get a scope of what goes on. I'm not disrespecting homeless shelters, nor am I disrespecting the people who attend homeless shelters or the people who work there. I'm simply sharing my observation and sharing what actually goes on. So if you can get in and they have limited space, you're in. If you don't, then that's it. And most people don't. So you have to kind of get there early. Now what they do is they have a curfew, and they lock you in like a dorm room with, like, I'm trying to remember, like 30, 40 beds. And they lock you in. And you cannot leave until morning. I think it was 8 a.m. And so you're stuck in this room, and you really can't sleep because you're in a room with strange people, strangers, who from various walks of life. And yes, you have drug addicts, you have violent offenders, you have criminal element, all these people. And there's also just people just trying to get through a night. But it's these subcultures that are within there which make it extremely stressful. And I don't fit into any of these subcultures that you would normally stereotype to be in these environments. I really stand out. And even if I was, or when I do dumb down my attire, I just don't relate. Now, I'm not saying that I'm better or worse, I'm just saying this is my experience. So being locked in for overnight, one of my concerns is where my vehicle is parked. And usually these places are, wordcraft here, in unique places where these people need a bed. So it's not necessarily the safest places. So to leave a vehicle, especially a decent vehicle or a nice vehicle, parked overnight while you're locked in, you can't even check up on it, that's nerve-wracking in itself. So this addresses, for example, homeless shelters where you can get a bed for a night. And I remember both when I was visiting professionally and the two times that I had stayed, 2 different times that I stayed at different locations, the washrooms were terrible. Now, I'm not disclosing where these places were, obviously, but you had human feces in the shower. The shower doors were ripped off. I mean, it smelled, and it was just, you didn't even want to go and relieve yourself in there. You're just like, okay, I'll just wait. So it's not like it's the Hilton or something where, and you get these great meals or anything else. I'm sure for a lot of people it's great, but it's the environment overall is terrible. Again, this is not a diss to homeless shelters or whatever, just sharing my first-hand knowledge and experience with this from 2 different perspectives. So with regards to just getting support overall, and I've mentioned this many times, we see how the liberal arts, theoretical pseudoscience of psychology has really dominated help, any kind of help. And it's always, when you go through, even when you do a search online and stuff, it's always mental health, mental, self-harm and everything else. And there's just nothing for men. Just to say, hey, listen, a support group, let's pull each other up and help each other out and so forth. And even just to talk, everything is professional. And I've talked about how professionalism really is just a detachment of humanity. You have to be professional, detached, no emotions. And then we get into what I've talked about in several videos recently. There's a difference between talking and having just a conversation. Conversation's a two-way street. Talking is just someone listening and then maybe throwing out what they think would be advice. So these are the obstacles that I have faced over the years with regards to what is available. But generally speaking, there is no men's support groups, men's rights groups, really. And you try to call and leave a message, no one ever calls you back. And it's almost kind of questionable because it's the automated robot voice. So you really don't even hear a real person. It's just like, what am I doing? You send an email, you may or may not get a response, and the response that you may get really doesn't do anything. So, as I'm talking right now, it just dawned on me how a lot of organizations who can really help, for example, society or community, they stick within the boundaries of, as a descriptive, their mandates. They won't grow outside of that or grow with the needs that may arise or that exist. They're very tunnel visioned. And I understand part of why that is, but really there's no reason not to expand based on need. So just to sum everything up, there are, for example, homeless shelters, there are some things available, but I don't fit the criteria, I don't fit in. And there's a lot of men like me who slip between the cracks, whether it be through a government agency or a nonprofit organization, to slip through the cracks, and even trying to find help, for example, with groups that deal with false accusations. They're very specific. They cannot or will not expand into, well, a false allegation causes chain reaction. And these people are only focused on the big cases. I've talked about this extensively. So the cracks in the system overall, even socially, are huge. Many people fall through, mostly men. Anyway, that's all I want to say in this video. Take what you will from it. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people say to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.